at Iowa. So I'm on the Pentacrest as we speak.
Excellent. Well, welcome back to the show.
And we're live.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. It's Thursday, May 13th, 5:02 p.m. Eastern time. What time is it in Iowa? What is the time difference in Iowa?
Oh, just an
2
hour.
hours?
We're Central
just an
time.
hour?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So 4 p.m., 4:02 p.m. Central time in Iowa, and we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to talk about hanging babies out of windows for their health and well-being, and also have Sarah Bond with us today.
Welcome back, Sarah.
Hi. Thank you for having me. Yeah, welcome. We're waiting here in Iowa City for the feral cats to come over from Chicago and help us out with our squirrel and chipmunk population, since we heard that the feral cats have been ordered. And, we're just hanging out here in the Midwest being crazy.
Wait, what are you talking about? Have you heard about this, Ben? Ben,
you don't know this.
Not a word.
Not a word. What is this feral cat thing? What is going on?
We have been told that the mayor has ordered 4 feral cats to be brought into the city as part of a program to get rid of rats in the city of Chicago. And we've got some chipmunks here in Iowa City that we feel also need to be addressed. So we're just waiting.
But wait a minute, I'm having trouble with this. How are 4 feral cats going to solve the problem of rats in Chicago?
It's many feral cats. I don't think it's just 4. I don't know.
I thought you said 4. Sorry. I also thought you said 4.
Oh, apologies.
Just 4 cats?
Oh, well, I think in the chat they say it's 1,000. I'm not sure how many exactly it's going to be. We're just being told that...
They're not like Drosophila. You can't order them out of like a catalog and just let them descend.
Why don't they release snakes?
Oh. Huh.
Snakes,
what kind of snakes, though?
Almost any kind will eat. I mean, you want to avoid poisonous snakes because, snake-human interactions. But snakes will eat rats.
They probably don't love city streets as much as a cat would, right?
That's true.
They do okay though. I think you release snakes in Chicago. They're not
I can guarantee that you would lose your bid for mayor if you told everyone that you were releasing snakes in Chicago.
Is this where I make a Rahm Emanuel joke? Am I supposed to insert the Rahm Emanuel joke after the snakes or before?
No, I think the vote winners snakes exclamation mark. That's my campaign for mayor.
Oh, okay.
And the exclamation point is made out of a snake.
Yes. And then my opponent will run snakes question mark.
Also made out of a snake.
Yes. Are you nuts? Question mark.
Chicago. This is their new plan, so we'll just see how it goes. Because what happens is whatever goes on in Chicago, we will look at it and we will see, if we can possibly imitate it here as well.
Well, excellent. David Botts, I'm counting on you to have my campaign poster done in time for your appearance on the show later today. All right.
So Sarah, I set you up.
One thing snakes do not have is either fingers or toes, which make them a very appropriate segue into the subject today.
Sarah, I know this is a random thing, but Sarah and I are friends on Twitter. We follow each other, and she has an excellent Twitter feed. If you do not follow her, it is just truly outstanding. And I should have had this pulled up already if I had been prepared, but I will try to find it quickly. But one of the things that Sarah had the other day was this amazing story about a graduate student's paper. A graduate student who is an expert in ancient metallurgy, or what was her exact?
Yes, she works on bronze metallurgy, and specifically how it was created and how they were joined in antiquity.
Yes. So this was fascinating, but that was that was like the very least of what was so fascinating about this story. And so I just thought that we would turn it over to you, Sarah, to tell the story, and then we'll open it up to like a larger kind of story about artifacts and everything, that kind of the alchemal kind of nature of them. So go ahead.
Sure. So if you've been to Rome, then many of you have probably been to the Capitoline Museum that has a number of Roman antiquities within it, and is a very early museum that was opened up within Europe. I think the original collection goes back to the 15th century in terms of when it was donated. And so the Capitoline Museum has a huge number of objects, but its kind of piece de resistance is this marble colossus of the Emperor Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 in the Roman Empire. It's in the atrium of the Capitoline. It's probably the most famous thing that people get pictures with. But actually, there's two colossi of Constantine within the museum, and the other one is bronze. And it's within a kind of sunlit area of the Capitoline Museum, right next to the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. So if you're trying to think of this museum in your head. So in antiquity, colossal statues, or in the plural colossi, are usually 1.5 times the actual size of a real person. And probably the most famous one from the ancient world is the Colossus of Nero. And they put it in front of the Flavian Amphitheater, and it became so famous for moving this Colossus to the front of the Flavian Amphitheater that it became the Colosseum, right? So Colossi were very popular, and it's something that if you were a badass Roman emperor, you wanted to have a colossal statue. I
want to have one, and I'm not even.
Me too. I'm only 5'3", so I feel like it's my only chance to be remembered in the way that I see myself, which is, a lot larger.
I would like to see myself as an entire collection of miniature GI Joes.
Oh,
but that's anyways.
I have some minifigs over here that are also.
Cool.
So the miniature is also very powerful as well. But this colossal bronze was probably made about 20 years into the reign of Constantine. Some people still think that this particular bronze statue was of Constantius II. And the thing about Constantine, just to give lots of background here, is that he's a lot like George Foreman, in that all of his children are named after him. So he's got Constantius II, then Constantine, right? So, and I don't know if you know this, but George Foreman
has an empire of nonstick grills.
George Foreman, I believe all of his children are like Georgina, Georgette, George. They're all, the nomenclature connects them back to him. And Constantine did the same thing. And so this statue may be Constantius II, but most people think it's probably Constantine the first. So yeah, we have this huge bronze statue that's made for Constantine. Eventually, it ends up in front of likely the Lateran. And the Lateran is a very large church in Rome that was the original Vatican. Just think of it as like Vatican I, as opposed to Vatican II, which is St. Peter's Basilica.
And of course, Constantine is chiefly known historically for having converted the Roman Empire, or begun the process of converting the Roman Empire to Christianity.
Exactly. So the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which is right outside of Rome, and you can go to the Milvian Bridge even today, it has a special resonance within the history of early Christianity, because Constantine is victorious against the other emperor, Maxentius, who is there within the city of Rome. So he is brought down as the Western Roman emperor, and Constantine enters the city in 312 after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And yes, he allows for Christianity to be listed. He lifts the persecutions along with Licinius, who is the emperor in the east. People oftentimes forget about Licinius, sadly, because Constantine well, he later defeats Licinius, but it's them together that do the Edict of Milan. And the Edict of Milan essentially says, you get your churches back, Christianity, and you're allowed to be a Christian now. So that's exactly what Ben is saying, is Constantine has a special place within Roman history, but also within the history of the early Christian church, for sure. And he has a huge impact on the city of Rome itself, and that's why he's part of the Capitoline museums. And so when we get to the 19th century, there is a very famous collector called Campana, who has all these bronzes and sculptures, etc. And he goes bankrupt in the late 1850s and sells off all of his collection in 3 different parts to England, Russia, and France. And in these sellings off of the collections, a number of pieces go to the Louvre in France. And around 1913 or so, they find this thing that they think is a toe, and they label it toe, and they put it in storage. It's not a big deal. Who cares about a big bronze toe?
Is it like just a big bronze toe?
Well, I mean, it's 38 centimeters long. It's quite large. It's a big hollow toe. So to me,
made out of metal.
Made out of bronze. It's cast through what we call a wax molding technique, which is a very special way to make bronze statues in the ancient world. We don't actually know anymore exactly how these hollow bronze statues were made, but it's a very famous technique for casting statues. So that's why it's hollow on the inside and not solid bronze, which would be very expensive and very heavy. But it's rather long, 38 centimeters, and so it sits in a box for about a little over 100 years. And then...
Wait, no, it would be like that. That's not that big. 38 centimeters is like this, right?
Big for a toe.
I mean, it is big for a toe. But it's not like this.
No, that's true.
It's like closer to this, like this-ish.
That's true. So okay, it's not like in Jurassic Park. Yeah, it's not like standing next to a T-Rex. We think that the original Colossus was probably between 30 and 39 feet high, to give you some sort of sense of how big the Colossus was.
38 or 39 feet. Oh, so I thought you had said at the beginning that they were 1.5 times.
At least.
Well, at least. Oh, at least. To qualify as a Colossus, you have to be at least 1.5 times bigger than a human normally is.
Okay, yeah. I got it. Sorry, I got those a definite. It wasn't a limit.
You got to remember that Constantine was a really big guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Size was something that he believed projected his own power. And actually the statue, I should say, it is him holding up a globe, and you can see the globe, and the globe is what we call the oikoumenios, and this is the world, the idea that he ruled over the world, which was really just the Roman Empire. But in his mind, the holding of the globe means that he had supremacy over the entirety of the Roman Imperium. So you can see that this was a very powerful statue, but his hand, which is also in the thread, if you go all the way down, there is a picture at the very bottom from Sophie Hay, who is an archaeologist in the UK, and a Pompeii archaeologist specifically. You can see that it previously did not have a finger, and now it does. And that is because a graduate student named Aurelia Azima, who was working on metallurgy, and specifically she was working in the Louvre collection, because there's going to be a large exhibition, I think within the next year or so, of the Campana collection. So she was going through them, and she looked at it and she was like, that's not a toe. That looks like a finger to me. And in fact, I feel like I've seen the socket for that finger before. So she decided...
And she's just a graduate student at this point, right?
She's a PhD candidate, I believe. So,
and how did she, most PhD candidates don't, go to the Louvre and say, hey, where's the box where you're holding all your bronze toes?
Let me see if they can be fingers.
Can I check them out to see if they're fingers?
Yeah.
How did she come to be looking at this particular toe that nobody had cared about for 100+ years?
That's a great question. There are so many pieces and odds and ends and in museums that are never put on display. For instance, the British Museum, I've worked pretty closely with, for instance, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. You're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of what is on exhibition.
The Louvre has less than
1% or something.
It's a tiny percentage.
It's a tiny percentage. So all of these things are held in storage, basically. And certainly if they're just fragments, there's no way to really put them on display when you don't really want to. When you have things like the Laud mosaic, or you have the Nike of Samothrace or something, why put a friggin' toe on display? But I believe that
I wanted to say how much this reminds me of, like, you know, that last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where he's just like rolling the box into like the archives of like
exactly
wooden boxes.
Where this toe
that is
exactly
stored. What this is like. This is where the toe was.
This is so true. And I mean, the thing is that oftentimes, so I worked at Monticello for a long time, and there are, so many pieces of porcelain that were broken by Jefferson and that he owned and that we excavated, right? And so the summer that I worked in the archaeology lab, you have all these teeny tiny pieces of porcelain and they don't make a plate. And if Fraser Nyman, who's the head of archaeology at Monticello, if it doesn't make a whole plate, it's not going on display in the house, right? So there's all these boxes that he's labeled of these pieces of porcelain. And it's the same thing at the Louvre. And so my understanding is that there is going to be a huge exhibit in the future that they're getting many graduate students to help out with, of trying to get all the Campana collections that have been split up in the 19th century, that they're going to put it on display at the Louvre, and then it's going to travel to St. Petersburg to be, I guess it'll be put on at the Hermitage. So I believe that she was working there to try and look through the Campana collection to make sure that they cataloged everything correctly and that they hadn't mislabeled anything before it gets sent, put on display and then sent to Russia.
So what, and it's a very practical matter, happens when someone all of a sudden challenges the index, no pun intended, the indexing of like, I think it was an index finger actually. So, what happens when someone challenges that? Like, did people listen to her? Did they like kind of laugh at her? Was there pushback, or people's jobs on the line?
Does the Louvre even care if it's a finger?
Yeah, do they care if it's a finger or a toe?
like I could see being the head of the Louvre and saying, okay, it's a finger. No skin off my back.
But the main sculpture, though, Sarah, was not in France. Mm-hmm. It was in Italy.
Right. So why does the Louvre care?
That's a great question too.
It's their fucking toe finger. It's theirs, and they don't want to give it back to Italy. Like, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I would think that is like the thing.
For sure, but about 10 years ago, even though 3D modeling has been around longer, there was a very wonderful, and he's still working frequently in museums. I think he works at a museum in northern Britain now, but a guy named Daniel Pett started doing 3D modeling within the British Museum, and he started doing midnight scans. That is to say, he was scanning objects and putting them online, and showing museums all over the world by using the British Museum collection that 3D modeling was something that was necessary and something that could bring in audiences, but also allow for research to really progress. So he worked with people from Pompeii, like Steve Ellis and Eric Paler, to rebuild things from Pompeii. And so really frequently now in museums all over the world, we start to see 3D modelers being hired by museums in order to try and reconstruct a lot of missing pieces in museums, but also to create models that they can print out and play with, or print out and have actual audience's touch in a tactile way that you can't with most other things. And so
so cool.
Aurelia Azima brought it to her PhD advisor and then to the 3D modeler for the Louvre, whose name is Nicolas Millard. And I read French, but if I mispronounce French, you guys, you're just gonna have to give me a pass. I already know ancient Greek and Latin, so just give me a pass on French.
I haven't heard my English, Sarah, so you're fine.
I do a weekly podcast on a French TV show, and I don't speak French, so you're in good company on
yeah. So people can correct me, etc., but my Italian is much better. But Nicolas Millard is the 3D modeler for the Louvre. So she and her PhD advisor took it to him. And then he's the one that went to the Louvre administration to really say, okay, so she found this thing that she thinks is not a toe. It's actually a finger. And this may be a big deal because it looks like it's from a colossal statue. And we don't have that many colossal statues. So, it could be one that doesn't exist anymore, or it could be one that possibly matches up with one that is already extant. And that turned out to be the case.
But did she have an idea of which statue it was from? Or did she just think it looked more like, because I thought that the idea was that she had like an idea in mind of like where she'd seen that finger should be. And like for some reason was carrying it around in a pattern recognition way that is truly remarkable in her brain, and like found exactly what kind of managed to like kind of loop those things together. But so she thought that that's naturally went to this. Had she told him that?
I don't know. I don't know. They have the French press. So I went back through all of the French press that had been done, as well as the Italian press, which is much more has been much more rabid about this story than France has. But she has got not
the digit back.
Exactly. She has not been giving interviews as much as Nicholas has. So, I mean, there's a very rigid hierarchy for PhDs in France and also for Italy. And so I think a lot of the time you let your advisor or the higher ups speak for you. I would love to hear more about it. But my understanding was that she definitely thought that it was from the Constantine, the most famous bronze colossus that still exists, at least to my mind. And so what they did is they did a scan of it. They did a 3D scan of the finger toe, and then they printed it out. And two of the curators from the Louvre accompanied Nicholas to a trip in 2018 to go to Rome to the Capitoline Museum. And they didn't have the original with them. They left that in Paris. And then they brought the scanned printout, which I believe they did in plastic. Which is normally what you do. They printed it out, brought it with them, and then they had, I assume, a magical moment during the closing hours of the museum where somebody would like, oh no, Eureka, we found it. And it was some sort of moment where everybody realized that that France had control over this long lost finger that now needed to be repatriated back to Rome. And so that's why it happened in 2018, and we're only really talking about it in full right now in 2021. It takes a while.
So first of all, I want to say to the management of the Louvre, you missed a really important opportunity here, which is to claim the rest of the statue based on possession of the finger.
Well done, Ben.
you had the chance to say, kind of like Taiwan claims the rest of China as, for the, you're used to anyway. You could have said, look, we have the finger. This is the authentic core of the statue. The rest of the colossus needs to come to Paris. The true imperial power would have done that, and it's a reflection of how far we've fallen in our imperial ambitions that you just gave the finger back to the Italians.
Well,
That's
who doesn't
right.
want to give the finger to the Italians? Let's
Yes. Italians, the most offensive thing you can do to Italians in terms of giving the finger, it's not like we're very into it. Yeah, they like that one. Also the fig. I don't know if you guys have ever done the fig, but the fig is one in Sicily, especially that is very offensive to people. So it's really more of a thumb than a finger. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are they going to attach it again?
Yes, they have. So I will put the picture of the reattached one.
So cool.
Into the chat so you can see, but it has gone back and they have welded it back on as of a few weeks ago when the museums opened back up in Rome, because they've been in lockdown off and on now since November of 2020. The museums have been closed.
It looks beautiful.
Isn't it great?
Really nice job. Look at how
I'm going to share my screen with
that is like a
reattached finger.
It's like a Rodin statue. Like it's like very like it reminds me of the hands, doesn't it?
It does. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, and that's Sophie Hayes' picture that I mentioned before. Sophie takes gorgeous photos, and she saw it when it was recently put back on display. And this is now something that the Italians are very proud of now that museums are back open and people are coming back and tourism is coming back into the city. And so I think it was the perfect time to give everybody the finger back.
So I want to ask.
I'm right there with you, Sarah.
I want to ask a serious question about this, which is
I don't.
No. I know we're all joking, but there's a serious issue here, which underlies the whole story, and actually you start with in your thread. The Louvre is not a historical museum; it's an art museum. The Capitoline is a kind of Roman relic museum, therefore more historical. The woman who discovers that the toe has been mischaracterized and is actually a finger is I don't know if she's an art history graduate student or if she's a classicist. And then you have
archaeologist
archaeologist, and then you have a project that is done through a combination of imaging, 3D printing, and sort of sleuthing. And so, I guess my question is, there's a sort of interdisciplinary quality to how this gets discovered. Whose job it is to figure out which fingers and toes go in art museums and which ones go, get reunited with hands or feet, or is it just something that happens when it happens because some sequence of events like this causes it to, causes that eureka moment to happen?
Yeah, I mean, normally museums are very proprietary about what collections they have. So I was really heartened, as I say in the thread, to see the Louvre working hand in hand with the Capitoline. And certainly we see a lot of changes going on right now because, for instance, in Germany, they are having a very serious conversation about the return of the Benin bronzes. And if you don't know,
I don't know what the Benin bronzes are. Can you explain that?
I'll put it into the chat. But the Benin bronzes, Germany has just passed a new I guess policy that has been put into effect that says that the bronzes that were taken out of Nigeria in the late 19th century and then split up to various European countries will be returned in the coming years and repatriated back to Nigeria. And we also have Benin bronzes in the U.S. We have them in Britain. They're all over. And so the issue of repatriation, particularly of African cultural heritage, is something that is a very big deal. So people are thinking about repatriation, not necessarily from France back to Rome, but people are thinking about it particularly for countries that were colonized by European countries and that a lot of their cultural heritage were taken. And in particular, I've worked, and I have an article that will be coming out in a few weeks on the 3D modeling of the head of Nefertiti in the Berlin New Museum. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the head of Nefertiti. That is
Wait, is it like the head of, like, is it a sarcophagus or is it like the actual head?
It's a polychrome bust of Nefertiti, and I will.
Sorry, I can like Google it too. I'm like,
I will put it into the chat as well, because this is important to answer your question. How does this come to be that people begin to really bring these things together and to think about repatriation?
Oh yes, of course I've seen this. Of course I've seen this.
Right. This is one of the most famous statues and busts in the world.
Yes, I've seen this. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was an attempt to guerrilla 3D model the head of Nefertiti a few years ago in 2015, 2016. It's called the Nefertiti hack. Actually, what happened is that someone within the new museum allowed for the 3D scans that had just been taken by the museum. They released them because Zahi Hawass, who used to be the head of archaeology within under Hosni Mubarak, demanded back Nefertiti in 2009 and 2011. And all of these scans were owned by the museum in Berlin. And
as some type of intellectual property, or just like
exactly these 3D scans are being owned in the same way that like physical, they were thinking of them as like we have digital 3D property that is exactly like our physical property. Right. And so now that we're beginning to think about repatriation in a lot of different forms, we also have to think about museum repatriation through a digital lens, because it's not now just about the physical objects, it's also about the possession and ownership of digital objects as well. And the Nefertiti head is probably the best example of that. And so as 3D modelers, which we oftentimes call digital humanists, as they have been hired by museums, they really are the ones that are catalyzing a lot of the ways that people think about objects fitting together, where they go, how 3D models can change the way we think about possession and ownership as a thing, because we don't want to replicate colonialism within the digital sphere, which is what we would call digital colonialism, right? So I think a lot of digital 3D modelers are changing the way that museums think about being proprietary and think about possession in general.
But presumably the ability to make really good models, 3D models of something, should actually reduce the proprietary instinct a little bit. I mean, if you can replicate, to use the most famous example, the Elgin marbles with a high degree of perfection, it puts a little bit less of a premium on having the actual ones.
Absolutely. So why does the British Museum not 3D scan and print out the Elgin marbles and then send it back to the Acropolis Museum? I mean, why do you need to have the original to be quote unquote authentic? What is authentic in this world that we live in now?
This is actually a study. This is like when I was a PhD student at Yale, one of the things that there were a number of people testing was like why people find certain things more authentic than others, and how really strangely some people find like off prints or like times that you were doing something and you slightly messed up the recipe, and so you had a whole screwed up batch, and they'll pay extra for it because they feel like it's more authentic, or it's like more rare, or there's like, and so it's just like these weird little things. But I completely agree with you. The other thing that I don't want to like, I know this is a sprawling conversation that we're getting into, like what we're getting into, but I'm actually really curious. I was also thinking that Ben said the Louvre is not a history museum, it's an art museum. And I was really struck by like the idea that I just was teaching my students in my property class about the Barnes Museum in Philadelphia, and all of like the kind of the primitive art with like the Renaissance art and all of this kind of stuff. And I was struck by the idea that like some of those things would be artifacts and some of those things would be art. And like, where do we decide to draw that line? And it seems so cultural and so valenced with elitism that like they're like, I don't know how else to put it, but it's just like, that's kind of what it seems to me. Sorry,
yeah.
What?
I think Ben? Ben, do you want to chime in?
Oh, sorry. I feel like you like took a breath, Ben.
Well, I did take a breath, you know.
Oh.
But no, I think this story is super encouraging for a lot of reasons. One of them is that the technology enabled a degree of collaboration that would have been very difficult under other circumstances. One of them is that everybody just seems to have agreed, well, the finger belongs on the hand, so let's just put it back. And it doesn't seem to have been discussed as a repatriation issue, but a reunification of the hand in question. And that there doesn't seem to have been a big fight over who gets
But what if it had been like
over
a
the
more
habeas
even
corpus, you might say.
What if it had been a more even split? What if it had been like two hands cupping together?
Yeah, exactly.
And one hand was like one hand
place.
was in France and one hand was in Italy. Like that seems to me as a particularly solemnic problem of actually like an inverse solemnic problem of like you'll put them back together or you keep them apart. Like I don't know. Like what would you do?
I mean, I think that that's a good question. That what we have here, it was such a small thing, relatively, 38 centimeters long, that the Louvre, I think, felt that the goodwill of this was going to outweigh the fight that would have happened over trying to get it back and forth. And I think also museums work in a way that it's like you do me a favor and I do you a favor. Right. So I'm sure, I have no actual evidence, but I am sure that there were promises made of like, yeah, we'll lend you the Nikkei, or we'll lend you, we'll lend you this piece on exhibition for X or Y, and then you guys will get this. I think it's a quid pro quo probably happening here.
I suspect that's right, and I also suspect that the Louvre made the calculation that having the finger in storage, not on display, is not especially high value, whereas the negative publicity of keeping the capital line from having the whole hand on display is a pretty high value in a negative sense story.
Yeah.
That like said, I don't want to second guess people.
They really
who do
strong-armed
the right thing. Keep that stuff in the chat, guys. So we should take some audience questions because they should get a finger into this.
I know. Daniel is hopefully going to be our.
And Mike Godwin, by the way, has a whole lot to say about the intellectual property issues associated with scans.
Yeah,
that is
it's very important. Yeah, it's something that has been litigated, but certainly museums are arguing that they still own their cultural property through the 3D scans and also through things that are anything that comes from it. Yeah.
Daniel, hello. It looks like you have a haircut. You look great.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So it's on the topic of Roman history. I'm just wondering whether you bristle at when commentators compare Roman history to the U.S. experience, or do you think that such such comparisons shed instructive light?
I have written about this, so I'm just going to put this. I have a list of both conservatives and also Democrats who have written about these comparisons. And so here's just a selection of them, from people like Tom Holland to Cullen Murphy, who was the former editor of The Atlantic, for instance. Here's just a selection of them. I do think that comparing historical narratives and seeing the effect of hyperinflation in the 3rd century, and perhaps the fact that we are heading into maybe a new era of inflation within the US. That's worthwhile. But it's not worthwhile to, I think, say that the Roman Empire fell for 1 or 2 or 3 reasons, and we are headed on the same path, usually of moral decline, sometimes attributed to the lack of religion, which is ironic because, of course, Gibbon says that it's Christianity that brings down Rome in some ways. So
and the Romans themselves were obsessed with stories of their own decline, and how earlier generations of Romans reflected the true virtues, and they were decadent.
Absolutely. And there are so many things to learn about the impact of disease. Like, we have the Antonine plague in the 2nd century, then you have the plague of Justinian in the 6th century. And so there have been a lot of analyses by people like Walter Scheidel, who is the head of classics at Stanford, or Kyle Harper, who is a professor of classics at the University of Oklahoma. They both have books on looking at disease in the fall and as understood within the fall of Rome. That is a very worthwhile and fruitful area. But these op-eds that are just about 1,000 words long, or maybe 2,000 words long, that are very facile, and it's like when you don't have anything to write, you just write an op-ed about, are we Rome? I'm a little bit sick of hearing, because it's
are
something
we
that needs more.
New York City again?
Yes.
And nobody asks the important other questions. No one asks, are we Carthage?
Yeah.
No one, well, I mean, they were.
Are we Troy?
They were the great naval power, the great power of commerce. Phoenician, who met their rising match. And found that they could not sustain their hegemony. I can make at least as good an argument that we're Carthage as I can that we're Rome. We just haven't had the Second Punic War yet.
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess some of the arguments that have been made about why Americans specifically like to compare themselves to Rome, although the British do as well. Tom Holland, who is a very popular Roman and Greek historian that lives within the UK, he really is good friends with Neil Ferguson from Harvard, and they constantly write about a lot of fall of Rome, sky is falling kind of things going on. And I would say that one reason that we like to compare ourselves to Rome is because we want to be Rome. That's kind of the embedded thing, is if we compare ourselves to Rome, we create a pseudo-genealogy between America and antiquity that reinforces an idea of Western civilization and, in a sense, makes us into the new Romans that we actually want to be. So it's not really so much about whether the fall of Rome is just like our fall of Rome or fall of the American Empire. It's really about creating a parallel that, in creating the parallel, creates more connections and relationships between us and a once great civilization, I think.
I was just going to, I don't know if this would be classically Roman, but this is like an early a coin from America. And I was just thinking about, so it was in the front of my Lapham's Quarterly on democracy. And I was just thinking, as you were saying this, about how even as we designed, even in our early design of how we were designing America, this feels Roman.
taken a walk around downtown DC recently? I mean,
Well, yeah.
I mean, no, I'm not like saying it's just, I'm not.
Executive order. Yeah, Trump's executive order comes to mind almost immediately, and that's one of the first things that Biden repealed in January 21st. Was that one of the first executive orders that he repealed was the one that essentially ruled that federal architecture, not just within DC, but I think elsewhere as well, had to follow into a neoclassical aesthetic. And that's because it wanted to create this kind of visual connection, a umbilical cord from the ancient world to today through the use of aesthetic vocabulary that created continuity. Ayn Rand would hate it.
And to be fair to Trump on this, he is channeling a very old American obsession in this regard. It's not an accident that Monticello has neoclassical, neoclassicism is the dominant aesthetic in DC architecture, in federal government architecture. And that's been true since we don't have the buildings that date from the beginning, but the Capitol is begun in the 1830s, right? And so it's a pretty the connection that, like, whether our connection, we experience it between the U.S. and Greece or the U.S. and Rome, is always a little bit fuzzy, but we're pretty consistent about wanting that connetion.
I would agree.
Yeah, and I would just say this quickly before we get David Boss's. I didn't hold that up because I think that is the paradigmatic example. It was just that I was listening to Sarah talk and then looked over and saw behind me this giant coin with a very Roman face on it, and I was like, oh yes, and this was early America. But if Oren Kerr was here from yesterday, this was something we should have mentioned, because there is this taking on of another culture, of the formality of another culture, to lend our own cultures native and new and nascent institutions formality and authenticity and legitimacy, that I think that is kind of something that didn't come up yesterday, but it's a really interesting thought. David Botts, you have a Sarah Bond book.
Hey, that's my book. It's over there too.
And a snake. And
so there's the book, and Ben, thanks so much. Sarah Bond is a fabulous Twitter follow, so everybody should
one of the best.
Her.
Thank you.
So good.
You should also buy her book, which maybe we can talk about at some point. But we got
Finger.
Finger. Yeah.
Finger. And then this weird
snakes.
Is that okay? Whatever. I'm going to talk to you about that later.
Whatever this is, Kate. Kate, you did this.
That's TLC.
No,
that's the really great girl band TLC from the 90s that I grew up with, and they're chasing waterfalls, but I did a cover for Chasing Gasoline.
But that's a real turtle. It's not.
Is that a real turtle with is that real hair on the turtle, or is that
moss.
algae growing on the turtle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. I was genuinely torn this morning whether that turtle was going to be the beast of the day or the good morning image. But the thing is about the beast of the day is I have to identify it, and obscurity seemed better with that turtle. It just to put it out there with the words good morning and say nothing explanatory about it, and let people just scratch their heads all day about it. That seemed like
it looks like some the cousin of the dragon in Neverending Story, or something.
Falcor? Are you talking about Falcor?
Falcor. Yeah. Doesn't it look like Falcor kind of?
Yeah, the luck dragon. Yeah.
Thank you. Sarah's so much smarter than me. I should just carry her around in my pocket. She can complete my sentences.
No, I just think we think very alike.
I think we do. Anyways, David, what's in your mind?
Well, thanks so much. Thank you, Dr. Bond. So beyond fingers, which are not toes, what is the strangest or most interesting found item that you are aware of being discovered, not out in the field, but in a museum, where you would least expect it?
Oh gosh, in a museum, a discovery. This is I was gonna say that this was discovered out in the field, but this is a coprolite of a Viking, which is to say, fossilized poop of a Viking actually exists, and has
How do you know it's of a Viking?
It
How
was.
do you get a fossilized poop?
Let me find my.
Do I want to see this? Does anyone want to see this? Do I?
Yeah,
I do. Want to see
it's called the Lloyd St. Coprolite, and it was found in York, in England, and is now on display. And it's at the Jorvik Viking Center, which I have never been to.
Is there something Viking I should do in Iceland?
Oh, gotcha. I don't know. Absolutely. I don't know enough about Iceland to be able to tell you which museums to go to. But this was found in England, and it's probably the thing that I think of the most. I think for Pompeii, in terms of things that were found or things that were discovered, there are just so many things to mention. Like there is a whole pig that was discovered, and kind of it was. You can see it that it is still on display.
Is it really similar to like how pigs are now? I'm kind of I've had this really dark, I feel like it's dark obsession with Pompeii for most of my life, of like being so interested as they like find, and like how long is that, like is this just like an infinite amount that they can continue to excavate in that area, Sarah?
They still have quite a few areas that they are excavating within Pompeii, and so they just recently found a snack bar not too long ago. It's called a thermopylium, and it's quite beautiful. And there is a new director of archaeology at Pompeii that is really making, as soon as things are excavated or as soon as things are found within Pompeii, they almost immediately now go up on Instagram. So if you follow the Pompeii excavations on Instagram and on Twitter, you can see things pulled out of the ground in like 1-2 days later. Wow. They are up on Insta. And so that Italians are changing. It used to be that if something was excavated, it would be years before it was published and put into the public sphere. And then there would be licenses galore. But the Soprintendenza in Pompeii and all of the archaeologists really working now know that social media and that allowing people to really see and understand Pompeii is to their advantage. But yeah, I'd say the Pompeii pig is one of my favorites, and it went on tour a few years ago when the British Museum had the Pompeii exhibition, as well as to the Ashmolean. But yeah, I love daily life. I prefer non-elites, and so most of the things I love are like shoes and socks. Like there is a pair of socks at the Victoria and Albert Museum from Egypt that are perhaps the oldest Mediterranean socks that we have. And I walk over to the Victoria and Albert every time I'm in London just to see those red socks, because Romans wore socks with sandals, and I think that is badass.
I do that.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
I totally wear socks with sandals, and I apologize to nobody for it.
I have one question quickly before we go to Richard's thing that I've been dying to ask you, which is when I was in Rome and I was looking at the it's the huge stretch that's like kind of it's all been excavated, and it's like kind of like there's
the Via dei Imperiali.
No, it's the area. It's like the area. It's I can't. It's like it's not the Pantheon. I don't think
the
it's
Roman
like,
Forum.
Yes, the Roman Forum, and it's just like all of this stuff, and there's just like all of these columns, and it's all like 15 feet under dirt, and they're like, oh, we're excavating more and more. Can I ask a really weird question? Like, I get the idea of a Pompeii, and like things are covered with ash and magma, but I do not understand how things get covered with dirt. Many feet of dirt, like even in hundreds of years. Like it just doesn't like make sense to me. So like, how does that happen?
That's a great question. So I don't normally sing the praises of fascists. In fact, I am known for doing the opposite. But I will say that Mussolini is the one that is responsible for the Via dei Imperiali that cleared through that area. So on one side, you have the Forum of Trajan, right, and Trajan's Column. And then on the other side, you have the Roman Forum. And Mussolini, when he came to power, decided, particularly in the 1930s, there are all these pictures of Mussolini with a pickaxe, right? Because he believed himself to be an archaeologist that was going to uncover Augustan Rome, not Inean, like Augustus. And so Mussolini puts an incredible amount of money into buying buildings from the church, like the Roman Senate House, for instance. He purchases the Roman Senate House, and he decides to completely, redo it and essentially to make all things that had belonged to the church more secular that were previously Roman. And so Mussolini excavates that whole area, but it had been built into housing for essentially low-income families, and low-income families had lived there since about the high Middle Ages. And so this was an accruing of different apartment blocks that were built on top of each other, the moving of dirt on top of each other, the reusing of stone, the milling of stone out of the Roman Forum in the 15th and 16th centuries. But yeah, it's a lot of dirt. So Mussolini comes to power, and he decides that he is going to rebuild the Areopagus, that he is going to be the new Augustus, that he wants to bring Rome back in. And so he puts incredible amounts of money into clearing all that dirt away and actually making the Roman Forum into something that we see a little bit more of semblance of today. But Romans, you would not have seen that same thing if you had gone to Rome in the late 19th and early 20th century. Like James Joyce goes to Rome, he sees lots of ruins, but he doesn't see a lot of things put back together, and he hates Rome. He thinks it's ugly, and he says that he believes Rome lives by showing its grandmother's corpse to the world. And so
I've never heard that line from James Joyce. That's beautiful.
Well, it's from a letter to his brother. Yeah, he writes a letter to his brother, and he's basically just like, "Fuck Rome, I want out of here." And I believe people make money off of just showing the bones of ruins, essentially. But yeah, Mussolini is really the one that clears a lot of that away and gives us the Rome that we have today. And so, look, I don't like Mussolini as a person, but he did bring a lot of the archaeological endeavors that were being done in the late 19th century by archaeologists like Lanciani into the fore and to really hasten the rebuilding of ancient Rome.
Yeah, thank you for answering that so completely. Like, no, that was amazing. I've had that question for like 5 years. So like, thank you so much. Richard, so nice to have you here. What is your question, sir?
So one of the things that's interesting about hearing about all this cooperation between museums is that it's happening across national borders, and I imagine that museum curators and the like are probably don't see these borders, but they have governments that see the borders, and I'm wondering how much of a hassle is it for museums to collaborate this way. You've got governments that are going to say, you can't take that from here. How does that work?
Yeah, it has to go to the very top. Sometimes we have directives that come directly from the president. So like Macron is the one that said that the Benin bronzes were going to be returned along with a number of objects. So with something like the Louvre, it can come from as high up as the president in France. But in this case, it was the head of the Louvre and the curators who decided to do it. But you're right that policy is really complicated, but it depends on if it is a museum that is owned and run by the state. And that is the case for the Capitoline museums, for instance. It's from the Musée de Comene, which is part of Rome, that is run by Rome. Or if it's a private museum that is specifically run by, say, a certain family or a certain university. But you're right that there can be statewide policy that means repatriation has to happen. But in this case, as Ben has already pointed to, this is really about two museums coming together and being like, hey, can we have our finger back? And then being like, yeah, you can have your finger back.
I love you so much, Sarah. We do have the same brain. I love it. I love it. I love it.
This is just going to be the symbol of this show.
I just like,
yeah. No, just ET. Yeah,
exactly.
or like the Sistine Chapel, We're just
we can do it this way. Except
wait, no, he was like much more upright. He was kind of like,
there we go.
Yeah, he's pointing upwards.
Yeah, he was like interrupting, man. But
I'm much larger than you.
Yes, exactly. But I'm much larger than you. We are going to have to wrap. It is 6:01, and we will be back in 22 hours and 59 minutes from now. This was a joy, Sarah Bond.
So great to see you.
Like,
thank you guys.
We should do this like on the regular. Like, please
Let's
come
do it.
back.
Yeah.
It's so fun. You have like this encyclopedia brain. We love it. It's so great. You like, and you have still, I think, yet to have like a full episode devoted to talking about your book, hopefully. And so we have to do that sometime. Well,
I can reduce the book down to a statement that like labor unions are good. That's kind of, yay, labor unions.
Well, that's an interesting thing for an archaeologist to say. So I would like to hear more about that. So I personally would like to hear more about that. We'll have you back very soon. Until then, Ben?
We don't have fun anymore, but we have a hand with 5 fingers. And it's big. And it's in the same city as it used to be for the first time in more than 100 years. And its finger is no longer in a box in a basement.
Exactly.
That's right. The world is healing. The world is healing.
Nature's healing.
Nature's healing. That's right. Hands are healing.
But it's like I'm gonna send some solid hand lotion to Italy.